President Donald Trump recently unveiled his new plan to overhaul the U.S. tax system and permanently codify trickle-down economics into law by simplifying the American tax code and giving trillions of dollars in tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans.
Our economy cannot take off like they should unless we dramatically reform America's outdated, complex, and extremely burdensome tax code. It's a relic. Got to change it. We have to compete with other countries. The current tax system is a colossal barrier standing in the way of America's economic comeback because it can be far greater than it's ever been. But we're going to remove that barrier to create the tax system that our people finally and want and deserve.
Now, you might be wondering how he's going to pay for these tax cuts, but that's not actually the right question to be asking. The correct question here is how you're going to be paying for these tax cuts. And the answer is that he's most likely going to have to dip into Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid in order to fund all these tax cuts for the rich. Because according to an analysis by Americans for Tax Fairness, Trump's tax cuts could total a massive 6.7 to 8.3 trillion, 3 to 5 trillion of which may not be paid for by closing other tax loopholes and or by limiting tax deductions. The resulting jump in the deficit threatens funding of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, public education, and other vital services. The framework is very similar to key features of the tax plans previously released by President Trump and House Speaker Ryan, which is the basis for ATF's analysis. Now, when it comes to specific cuts and costs for each cut, his plan aims to first provide massive tax cuts that largely benefit the richest Americans and biggest corporations through direct tax cuts and indirectly through big cuts in corporate taxes, 80% of which benefit wealthier Americans, according to the Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center. Second, he'll provide a modest middle-class tax cut largely by doubling the standard deduction, although much of that could be taken away if the tax plan repeals the personal exemption and the head of household filing status. So again, with the amount of tax cuts that we're talking about here to the tune of trillions of dollars, you just can't fund all of that by closing tax loopholes. That's not the way this is going to work. Ultimately, we all know what's going to happen. He's going to dip into the cookie jar that Republicans have been wanting to dip into for a very long time. Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. Now, is he going to tell us this up front as he's trying to sell the American people this bill? Well, of course not. And it's not just Donald Trump and the Republicans, it's also Democrats like Heidi Heitkamp who are seriously considering voting for this bill. But cutting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid as a means of paying for these tax cuts for the wealthy, I mean, that's something that is inevitable, and you could bet on it. So this is something that would obviously exacerbate income and wealth inequality, because by taking money away from the working class and putting more money into the hands of the wealthiest Americans, well, what's going to happen? You're going to crash the economy, because when rich people get more money, they sit on that cash. They almost never reinvest it back into the economy, but when you put that money in the hands of normal, ordinary working Americans, they spend that money, stimulate the economy, and that benefits the aggregate economy. I mean, all sectors benefit when working class people have more money, but this isn't about actually improving the economy. Donald Trump's only agenda is to cut his own taxes, which is why he's repealing the estate tax as well as part of this plan, because he wants to make sure that when he dies, his kids don't get taxed. Now, when we get into specific percentages here, SV Data of the Huffington Post explains shareholders of corporations would enjoy a rate cut from the current maximum of 35% down to 20%, according to a White House briefing Tuesday. Owners of, quote, small businesses who pay taxes on their individual returns rather than with a corporate filing would pay no more than 25% instead of the current maximum of 39.6%. And the wealthiest Americans would see that top 39.6% rate fall to 35%. As for lower and middle class Americans, 3 Trump administration officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity would say only that Trump and House and Senate Republican leaders are promising to set rates and tax bracket thresholds so so that those taxpayers would enjoy the most savings. This package is completely designed with the middle class in mind, one of the officials said. Tax relief in this package is focused on middle class families. Now, the way that they're selling this is incredibly disingenuous and misleading, because even though they're trying to tell us that they're really focusing on the middle class here, well, the details for the middle class, they're not so hashed out yet, because middle class people, they don't really get that great of a deal in comparison with elites. But all the tax cuts for the elites, I mean, they have all those details fleshed out, but when it comes to the middle class currently, I mean, they're just thinking that if they double the standard deduction, well, that's going to be good enough for these peasants, but that if you remove other exemptions, then it's going to even out. That's not really going to work so well for the middle class. So you're trying to dangle this cookie in front of the middle class and sell them this tax cut for the wealthy by saying you're going to give them more money and put more money in their hands by doubling their standard deduction. But in actuality, they're not going to have that much money in their pockets. Are they, Donald Trump? So if you're a middle class person who is excited about Trump doubling your standard deduction, well, you have to consider that this plan will repeal other personal exemptions, and you have to also consider that this will amount to cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So, I mean, this plan has a high cost to lower and middle classes of this country with very low benefits, but when it comes to the elites, I mean, it has high benefits with zero cost to them. So this is nothing more than trickle-down economics, and what Donald Trump wants to do is cement trickle-down economics into law, because he wants to make sure that when he retires and when his kids retire, they don't have to worry every couple of years about tax reform and, taxes going up or down. They just want to make sure that they're going to have a really comfortable life, and they're already going to have that irrespective of these tax cuts that they want to give to elites. But they're so greedy that all they could think of is more wealth. That's the only thing that they think would benefit their lives and make them happier. So they'd rather shit on all of us and fuck us over in order to make themselves happy. That's what happens in oligarchies, and that's why we don't give rich people like Donald Trump power over policy, because he's gonna get in there and give himself and his rich friends tax cuts. So we've got to do everything in our power to defeat this trickle-down economics on steroids bill, but I really worry that the Democratic Party, or the so-called resistance, mind you, isn't going to be fighting Donald Trump on this particular issue, because we've seen that Donald Trump is trying to butter up Heidi Heitkamp. He's really trying to get in good with Joe Manchin. He's talking with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer currently about working together. So unless we put up a fight at the grassroots level, you're looking at tax cuts to the tune of trillions for the wealthiest Americans in this country who already have it all, and you're going to have to pay for that with cuts to your Social Security and your health care. And that, to me, is absolutely unforgivable and egregious.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.